Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepke, and today I am storming the castle. Today I am writing a D&D campaign for beginners, specifically because my best friend told me that she wants to try D&D for the very first time. It's something that I've played for a while, although I'm not particularly skilled at it, but I have written my own D&D campaign in the past, so I figured I would try again and do another one tailored to her and try to do it in a way that she will really enjoy herself and end up wanting to play D&D with me in the future, because I really like it a lot. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm coming up with the world and the characters and all of the stuff that's going on in the world to give her the most fun experience that she can have. I'm very excited, but I'm also very nervous. The last time I wrote a D&D campaign, most of the people were beginners except for two, and then those two people were like on opposite ends of the spectrum of what they expect from a D&D campaign. So one of them was just like, yeah, sure, you're the dungeon master, I'll just go along with whatever you say works. And then the other one was like, but in the rules it says this, and was going through and like nitpicking at every little thing. So that made it kind of difficult the first time. But this time all of my players are going to be beginners, and I can take the time to learn a little bit more about how to be a better DM through introducing them to it. And I can also do everything I can to tailor the experience to them and make sure that they have the most fun possible. So I'm really excited to do this. So what I've done so far, I have a document that I've set up where I'm going through the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I want to try and write this as quickly as possible. That's one thing. And in order to do that, I'm going to use the Dungeon Master's Guide because it's there and it's a great resource for writing in general, and it has a lot of fun things you can do for dice rolling to try and decide what happens in your story, so you don't have to put in too much effort into creating your world if you don't want to, and you can get through it fairly quickly. And then it also just has a bunch of advice on writing that's really helpful, especially if you want to learn more about writing fantasy stories. So this is great for a lot of reasons. I at least have consistent material to work with because I have the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and the Monster Manual that I can use for all of this. Now, one of my friends wants me to make her character for her, and the only instruction that she gave me is that she wants the most chaotic neutral character ever. So I'll have a lot of fun coming up with something that fits the idea of my story, but also is more in tune with what she specifically wants. Something that I think she might have a lot of fun with. But first, I'm just gonna go ahead and get into the story itself so that I can get that settled before I worry about creating her characters. So this is the document that I came up with. It has the basic things that I need to go through to make the story as a whole. I already kind of have an idea of the theme for this particular campaign, and the theme that I would very much like to have this is the Siege of Troy. I don't know how to spell siege, oh my goodness. So the Trojan War. It's a very popular story format, but in particular, I like this one for my friend because she absolutely loves Greek mythology. And I love Greek mythology, and so I think it's a really good setting to have. I also think it would be really interesting to have a story where she could possibly influence the outcome of the Trojan War, and maybe the Greek invaders don't succeed, or maybe, something else completely crazy happens just based on her decisions. So it could possibly change the history of the world depending on what she does in the story. And I think that she would like that idea quite a bit, sort of creating an alternate history reality around what she does. So it's the Siege of Troy. Obviously the setting is going to be ancient Troy. So I've pulled up some information here to help give me a guide for what the setting is going to be specifically. Historians believe that Troy was a part of Turkey, a part of modern day Turkey. So I pulled up a couple of maps and I'll be using that as a basis for any maps that I draw during the campaign. Now we're going to think a little bit about the plot. When I am writing a plot for Dungeons and Dragons, one of the things that I always try to think of is different ways that the people who are taking part in my campaign might react. My friend is the most obstinate person I have ever met in my entire life. She will go sideways of anything that you want or expect her to do just because that's the kind of person she is. Like, always has to be contrary to everything. So because of that, I need to plan for every eventuality of her being right on task with following along the main story plot line that I want her to go with her going the completely opposite direction and not doing anything that I set forth in the story, or of her, going left or right or whatever way she decides to go with it. And that may sound really complicated, but the way that I plan to arrange things a little bit better is through creating scenes rather than like a fully structured plot. As long as I keep the plot loose enough to where it can to where I know everything that's going to be happening in the kingdom itself and like the top-down view of everything, then whatever she does in the story, I can determine how that's going to affect the plot as a whole as she goes along, and I'll be able to have events take place around her that are a result of her going in that weird direction, whatever that she chooses. So I do need to have like a very high level plot, very top down, looking at the history and culture of the world and all of that kind of stuff, and the things that she could possibly do, and then seeing how that top down plot affects her decision making and how her decision making can change how everything is supposed to happen. So I need to know multiple possible endings, and then I just need to have a general idea of everything that's going to be surrounding her so that it feels very immersive. So the way that I'm going to do that is I will start with a main story plot, and then once I get that all written out, I can come up with different branches, and you see down here that I've planned for all of the branches that I need to do. The reason why I have the wayward plot here, my husband, he has a friend who was part of a D&D game where the dungeon master had planned out this really grand adventure spanning, an entire kingdom and all of that kind of stuff. And what they ended up doing was staying in one city, building the commerce of that city and becoming like the rulers of the city financially, completely ignoring this like huge plot that was happening. And so the dungeon master had to on the fly figure out how to like arrange an economic based dungeon or an economic based story for them while still having his overarching plot affect the things that are happening to them. And I don't want to be caught off guard like that if my best friend just decides like, I don't want to fight in the Trojan War. I want to go and explore the rest of Troy and like become a deserter from the army and all of that kind of stuff. So I just want to be prepared because like there's no telling what's going to happen with her taking part in it. Isn't it great to have friends like this? I was thinking about the story Dragon Age, sort of how you can, as you're starting your adventure, you can kind of choose like who you are and your job and all of that kind of stuff, and other similar video games where like you're given a task at the beginning and that task acts as your introduction to the world and the way things work. What I was thinking is that I want this to be very similar to them playing a video game, in that they are given a task right at the beginning that gives them that sort of tutorial. And one of the ways I'd like to do that is by having them immediately land on the shore and then going off and having to do a mission where they're scouting the territory. So in this way, they'll come across monsters and maybe come across enemy soldiers and all that kind of stuff. They can either sneak through or they can, try and fight their way through, and whatever decision they make will affect the troops back home and whether or not their landing there is a surprise to the Trojans, or whether or not it's like they see them coming a mile away, and it will all depend on how they go through this tutorial. So after that, I think logical next step, they have to return home or return back to their camp, report on their findings, and they'll get their first reward for their first mission or be punished. So I think the next step, they're going to set up for the siege. Each of these things could easily be their own campaign, like for one individual playthrough segment. And it's fun making sure that like in one playthrough your party can like accomplish one major goal of the story. And I think that's what I'm going to try to do, because it'll give them a sense of finality while still having like more stuff that they need to achieve later on, instead of having to stop right in the middle of everything. After they set up for the siege and get their food supply sorted, then they need to deal with the first attack, strategic attack by the Trojan warriors. And this will determine whether or not Troy is able to get supplies throughout and so that plays a major part in the story overall. And so their success or failure will determine things later on in the story as well. It's difficult not to over-plan for something like this. I have a lot of different things here, but I think this is the hinge point of when the tide turns one way or another. So I'm gonna have a delegate party approach the Greeks at this point in the story. And I'm not quite sure how I should have, like, in some way I feel like I need to have the main characters do something to influence how the treaty discussion goes. But I'm not quite sure what that is. There could easily be multiple things that happen. If they're successful in the peace talks, then they'll prepare to leave and the campaign for this will be over. If they fail at the peace talks, then the war is going to continue. So from this point forward, the continued story is only following the failure. And I will make it really difficult to succeed in that part, but not so difficult that it's impossible, because I do want there to be the option of them just completely changing the way everything works. And this is another branching point where on the one hand they could win everything, and on the other hand they could potentially have to continue the war. So from this point on, it's the failure timeline again. Alright, so I got a bunch of points to go through here, but I think each one is going to be its own individual adventure to go through. My friends don't tend to have a whole lot of time, and so what I want to do is go by one plot point at a time and then work through all of the scenes that are going to go with that. So I'm going to focus just on the very first campaign during this writing time, and that's going to be the sort of tutorial mission that they go through. So the major scenes that are going to happen because of this is there's going to be a scene on the boat as they're approaching the shore. This will give them the backstory and their mission. There's going to be the scene where they land, and that's where they embark on their adventure. Now, if they follow the plot that I've set forth, if they don't just go off on their own doing anything, then what would need to happen is that they can choose their path. So I looked at the topography of the area, and some of it is kind of like hilly land, and you can sort of follow along those hills until they get up to fairly close to Troy. And then most of it is plains leading up to it. And so they could go across the plains, which would be easier to traverse, but it would also have, it would be a lot easier for them to be seen by the enemy as they approach. And so that's the more dangerous path. It's more likely for them to lose this mission if they go along that way, but they can if they want to. Alright, so that gives me a few key scenes where we get the backstory and their first mission. They get to see where they are, and then they get to choose what direction they want to go in. They can make decisions about what their scouting mission entails and what information they plan to bring back. Optionally, I will give them the ability to sabotage defenses or gather information or really do whatever they want around the city of Troy. Realistically, they could both survey the defenses and go into the city, and I would allow them to do all of that. And then after they're done at the city of Troy, then they would need to return to the encampment. Travel to Troy, and that's where they're going to get most of their encounters with monsters. So to me, there's plenty here that I could use to have a nice short mission for them to accomplish. I think they could probably get through something like this in a couple of hours. So on this first mission, I also want to send someone along with them who is some type of rogue, and that person will give them all of the basics of like sneaking around, of finding traps, of doing all of that basic kind of stuff that you want to learn how to do. Maybe I'll send two characters along with them. I can send a warrior and a rogue, and in that way I can prepare them for both fighting and for secrecy. And both of those things I want to have peppered in throughout the whole thing. So on the boat, we've got, I'm going to say Ajax, we're going to have Odysseus, maybe not going to have Achilles yet because I want him to come later on. I kind of want Odysseus to have to leave and get him and then come back. So we're going to have merchants, we're gonna have villagers, soldiers. Yeah, I think that's good. Those are all the ones that I need to worry about anyway. Now I'm gonna set aside the Dungeon Master's Guide and look at the monster manual a little bit, because I want to look at what sort of monsters are gonna be in the area. Cool, so that makes it easier for random encounters. Now I want to think about the possible things that my best friend can do to throw a wrench in the plot of everything, which I'm certain she will. So I have to be prepared. So first I'm going to list out all of the possible things that she can do that I'm aware of. So how likely I think all of these options are, not terribly, but it's just good to have an idea of different things that could happen. So now I'm going to organize them into different categories to sort of give myself something to make it easier to determine how I'm going to try and direct things if they end up going that way. So that seems good. I have a bunch of options for if they decide to do things that I don't expect them to do. And I think that no matter what they end up coming up with, I have some sort of alternative strategy for dealing with it, even if it isn't exactly what I have written here. I have different ideas of how to address it. And then I've also got the scenes that need to happen in my story. From this point, the only thing that I have to do is actually write brief dialogue that happens within each of those scenes. But thank you all so much for joining me today on CC Writes. I will see you later.